So, welcome back, everyone. It is your host, Zenith, or Zenith, as Margaret would probably call me. My lovely host today is returning guest, Margaret Agard. Margaret, as if you don't know, Margaret is a Christian mystery, very, very interesting person. She's also currently, as of reading this book, president of the Relief Society, which is helping the sick and afflicted. So he's the author of 2 current books, the In His Footsteps series. The first one we already had a previous interview on a long time ago. It was How I Gave Over My To-Do List to God and Got More Done. And the second book, which we were going to discuss today, which was Emails from the Mission Field, Things I Learned from Serving. So Margaret, very, very warm welcome. I really, really wanted to catch up with you again from what seems to be a lifetime ago to discussing this book. I found your first book so funny and so irreverent and so self-depreciating that it really did make me chuckle and was just such a pleasure to read that I have been looking forward all this time to reading your second book to see what that's about. And hopefully we'll have a good interview today. So how are you and how have you been?
Oh, good. Happy to be here. We finally got the COVID and got that out of the way. So now we've got all those antibodies, right? And yeah, I'm looking forward to our discussion. I've been looking forward to it for a few weeks. So yeah.
Yeah, good. So am I. I never even thought of that, to be honest, because I don't even know the time periods in this book, whether or not your decision to become missionaries happened over COVID, or where did COVID land when you and Parker decided to become missionaries, and how did that affect, your interaction with your community and new congregation and stuff like that?
No, this book was written like 6 or 7 years ago, and it happened like a few years before that. So it's been a while since we were there.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Well, that gets out of the road anyway. So your second book is mostly all about missionary work. It's very different from the first book, and I'd say it's split into 2 distinct parts. One where you, Parker, volunteer for a lot of the time. Most of the book is spent in Flagstaff, Arizona. Before then, you are called to service in Alaska. So those are the 2 main parts of the book, which we kind of want to talk about today, and some fascinating tales. But I guess I don't know whether maybe I've forgotten about it or whether it wasn't mentioned in the book. But obviously, the first part of the book is where you and Parker have just made the decision to sell up your house, the house that he actually built, and live out of your 87 Camino.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and decide to become missionaries and learn Spanish. And as I said, maybe I missed it, or maybe it wasn't in the book. How did that come about? What prompted that? How do you go from that lifestyle, that massive life change, to go from that lovely, beautiful house with peacocks that always landed on your roof to sell up that house and pretty much everything you own and take this incredible journey to become missionaries?
Well, we even when we first met knew that we wanted to do that. And I still had some kids at home to be raised. So we talked about that for years until they were out of the house. And then we're like, okay, it is now the time. And, Parker was always helping other people. I thought he was never going to actually finish that house. He finally finished it so that we could sell it. And actually, it was interesting because we were praying about, should we sell it? Should we just keep it and have the neighbors keep a watch on it while we spend a few years, serving as missionaries? Or should we rent it? And it was interesting. I happened to be at the church and I was praying in the Relief Society room, and I had the thought, you need to just sell it and get rid of everything except a few basics. And when I came home, Parker had been down in his greenhouse, and he came up and he said, I really have been praying about it, and I really feel like what we need to do is just sell it. And so we both got that answer on the same day, that this is what we should do. And we did. It's interesting. When we did it, it was during one of those times when housing prices were going up and up and up, because they do that, right? They and then they crash and they go, And it was not even at the top. People would say, you waited another year, you could have twice as much for that house.
Yeah.
And but we thought,
Yeah.
well, God will take care of us. We got what we got, right? And so when we came back and we 5 years later and bought another house, people are like, I can't believe you got that house for that price. And God's like, well, we're willing to sell the house for less than you could have gotten, and I'm just giving you a gift back. So yeah.
It's kind of like that when you give something away with a good heart, or when you do follow that instinct, you're always rewarded for it, isn't it?
I think so. Sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't look like it. What is that saying? No good deed goes unpunished. But yeah.
Yeah. I know. It's kind of the journey along the way where you kind of, God, how's this going to work out? I'm sure that must have been prevalent in your mind, that this is going to come to an end at some stage, and we're going to have to use what kind of little funds we have, because there was so much expenses along the way. We're going to have to potentially come back to the US again and find a house that's going to. I'm sure that still was prevalent in your mind the whole time.
It was kind of, but we actually had a small business that kept going. We had people running it while we were gone. So we knew we'd have some income when we got back. And Parker was old enough that he had some retirement income. So we felt like, okay, we can handle this. I guess I didn't worry so much about that. It was more because Parker and I do quibble a lot. And every time we talked about where we were going to live after this was all over, we'd end up fighting. And so it was like, okay, we can't talk about this. I was like, he's open to anywhere. And I was like, it has to be near some of the kids. But, he's a guy. As long as he has his wife, he's happy. Where I'm a mom. I'm like, no, I want to be near the kid. Yeah.
And honestly, when you were waiting on that call from your superiors, I guess you had this idea that you wanted to go to Peru. That was your dream location. You were going to go to Peru. You were going to speak Spanish.
Yes. Since I was like in my 20s, I thought one day I'm going to be able to go serve missions, and I want to go to Peru and speak Spanish, right? And then we got this call, and it was to Flagstaff, and we thought, all right. And then, well, there were some reservations near there, so we were trying to learn Navajo or something, right? And Spanish was a big part of what we wanted to do. We really wanted to get immersed in Spanish and learn that language. And then, like a week or so later, we were talking to the mission president over the area where we would be serving. And he asked why we were learning Navajo. Like, did we already know Spanish? And it turned out our letter didn't say that we were going to be serving with Spanish people. His did. And so that's how we found out. We weren't in Peru, but we were going to be serving with Spanish speaking people, which turned out we were terrible. We got better, but never really good. Yeah, it was like, well, here it is, and you prayed for it. You wanted Spanish speaking, you got it, but good luck. Yeah.
Yeah. Why Peru? But was there a particular reason? Or is just Peru one of those like kind of bucket listy things, or?
I think for me it was. I don't think Parker wasn't particularly. He didn't care where, as long as it was Spanish speaking. Where I was all about Peru. It was kind of like, oh, I want to see Ireland because I saw too many Irish Spring commercials growing up. It's like, oh, like, so yeah. So somehow I had it in my head. I wanted Peru. I had no idea. Did I want to wear those little hats? I don't know. That wouldn't be weird. But
yeah, very interesting. And the thing about it was that when you got the call to go to Flagstaff, you had to make this thousands of miles of journey, and we're kind of not going to get into it, but there was such a series of events. Even when I was reading it, I was like, oh my God, this couldn't get any worse. Your car kept breaking down, and they were out hundreds of thousands of pounds. And it was just like, I guess if anyone kind of didn't know, they'd go, she has to be making this up. There's no one who could have that amount of bad luck. But you got that message to say, look, this is going to prepare you. It was a foreshadowing of all the trials that you were going to be facing ahead, so it kind of like battle hardened you.
It was like everything. I couldn't believe it. Like, if we had been home with Parker's tools, he could have taken care of all this. something got crimped and the transmission went out on our vehicle, and we were trying to get to a daughter's wedding. And we had driven back and forth across the United States a dozen, 20 times in our vehicles and never had a problem. And so now we've sold our house, we can't do anything, and now we're trying to just, go. Well, the United States from the west coast to the east coast is 3,000 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometers, probably like 5,000 or something. It's a trip. And so everything kept going. First, the transmission goes out, and then bam, the tire gets broken. Over the course of about 4 days, every tire went flat. Every tire went flat. And we had just bought new tires. It was, I couldn't believe it. And I thought, that's what I'm saying. Oh, is this, why is this happening? I can't even pray anymore. I can't even, like, every day I pray for safe travels in the car to work, and then something goes wrong. Like, I can't even pray. And I kept thinking about women, who had prayed for years to have children in the Bible, the women who were just, and I thought, how do they pray for years? I can't even do it for 4 days. I've kind of lost my faith. And then, the answer was, it's okay. And it's preparation, as you said, preparation for the fact that you're going to have some trials throughout this thing. And how well can you and Parker handle it together? And it turned out not too well to start with, but we got better. I was like, really? Our mission is going to be a bunch of little irritating things happening? And kind of, but not 100%. There are a lot of good things too. So
yeah, even the detours, taking a wrong turn twice and cost you like 20 miles, and then the last one was like, well, it's 30 miles or something like that back. If we want to go back that way, we may as well just travel on the 60 miles.
Oh my gosh,
yes, it's pretty much going to be the same thing.
That's right, because like I said, we've driven back and forth across the U.S. quite a bit, and so we knew we always stopped at about the same spot. And at one point, not only had the transmission gone out, we got started again, then the speedometer went out and the mile markers. And so I was kind of watching the mile markers so I could gauge our speed. And that's when I realized, when we got back on the freeway, we were going back the way we came. And this is in the western part of the United States. And those exits are 20 to 30 miles apart. Like, once you're going the wrong way, you're going the wrong way and turning around, it's going to be an hour. And then the next time it happened, there was an exit where there was a hotel, and it was like another 30 miles down the road before you'd get to another hotel. And so he missed that exit, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try not to be mad. It's late, I'm tired, and we'll just keep going. Those are the kinds of things that kept happening over and over again. And just, I thought, why is this happening? Things like this, like I said, we've made that trip more than close to 20 times, and why is it all happening on this trip? And that
when you're in the middle of those kind of things, we were just talking about, I think, just before the interview live, when you're in the middle of those, you're like, why is this why am I being punished? You don't see the big picture. Sure, you don't understand. Well, most of us don't anyway. Even when you got that message, you probably didn't associate it with the hardships that were to come.
I think what's most people are really good at handling the big stuff. And that's what I say to my kids. My kids would come in and something horrible will happen. They just totaled the car. And they'd be like, Mom, usually you get upset. And I'm like, well, the little stuff, I might get really mad at you. But the big stuff, you're kind of like, oh, step back, take a deep breath. And so on this trip, there was nothing big. It wasn't one of the ones where you step back, take a deep breath, I'm going to handle this, right? It was all these little irritating things over and over again. Yeah. And I'm worried about the wedding. I had the wedding dress. Are we going to get there in time?
That's right. I forgot.
Yes. And what if we're in an accident and we have like this destroyed wedding dress with blood on it or something? My poor daughter and her fiance was like, is she going to get here? Because Mom always gets here. Don't worry about it. But
yeah, it was kind of like that Chinese thing, death by 1,000 cuts. It's not just one big thing. It's all these little small things that just keep piling up and piling up. Yeah, it was astonishing to me. Just how much kind of bad luck can someone have? Like, that's just incredible. Even new tires blowing out. Like, how does that even happen?
Right.
It was Yeah, it was
I mean,
incredible.
towards the end, it was like we came out and there was another flat tire. Oh wow! Just like,
Yeah,
we had plenty of them on this trip. Yeah.
yeah, amazing. But you got there anyway. You know, you got the Flagstaff, and obviously it wasn't, you know, the Navajo Indian reservation that you can hope for. But you know, you got to have a plant nursery after all, didn't you? And you know, kind of when you were learning your Spanish, you got to have a funny story about saying, "Well, we'll go to the beach, a nice, lovely spot to learn our Spanish." Only for Parker to go, we can't stay here. You didn't have your contacts in, so you didn't quite know
I know.
what was
I
going
didn't
on.
realize it was a nude beach, which is probably not the best place for missionaries. We practiced our Spanish so much, my tongue actually got sore. I didn't even know that was possible. I was like trying to roll my R's. I'm not good. I still can't roll my R's, but I was trying. Yeah, sore tongue. And then we got there and they started speaking Spanish to us, and we're like just dumbfounded. We have no idea what you're saying. It goes, talk to us like we're two. That's all I could think to say. Just talk to us like we're two.
Brilliant. Yeah, an interesting thing kind of that I picked up on when you got to the training center, you know, to learn your training and get your badges, and you met this old woman, this old kind of redhead woman, and she was having a bit of a joke or something, and saying like, you know, I'll probably go to Mongolia, and then you kind of mentioned that's actually where she ended up. And you know, you mentioned
Yeah.
this interesting thing where you're kind of like, well, it seems to be the eldest, and you know, who are called to serve, end up in the most remotest, hard locations. And I guess to most people that would kind of seem, well, that's not really fair. They're not equipped to handle that. But it wasn't about physical strength or emotional strength. It was them people who had the spiritual strength, the most faith, I guess, if you like, you know, the real desire to serve that enable them to, you know, to handle those situations. And you say that we'd only just arrived, so we hadn't quite developed that kind of spiritual strength at the minute. Although I dare say that was to come much later. You could have probably
That was
served
to come.
anywhere in the world by the end of that trip.
That's a
But it
good
was just a
question.
very
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because I can remember talking to one couple who were going to Africa, and not like South Africa. They were going to Africa, and they had been there before, and they said, "Yeah, we just go out to the villages and sit down, and people come gather around because we have this white hair, and they really honor their elders. They
yeah,
they want to hear what we have to say, unlike um, probably many of the first world countries
yeah,
today." Yeah,
yeah,
and we
yeah. And
oh, yeah, go ahead.
that was interesting because, you know, that respect for elders is something that, you know, you and Parker encountered in your journey. The respect the people in that community, and probably more so in Alaska, where they kind of like had that very much, you know, respect for your elders. You know, the elders of the community was very much evident, and it does seem to be something which is lacking to some degree in our kind of societies. You know, I guess you learned a lot from those experiences, and it does go to show you that, you know, the wisdom of the elders is something that shouldn't be taken for granted and shouldn't be kind of looked upon as, you know, they're quite weak, especially when you look at those kind of elderly people who were sent to Mongolia and, as you mentioned, Africa, you know, who were very well treated, even if their physical health hadn't been there. They were treated very, very much in respect and awe for the wisdom that they contained.
Some of your listeners might be thinking about this stuff, that they might be thinking, well, I'm too old. Like I thought when I was younger, but I'm too old now. And what one couple said to us made sense. They said, I have arthritis. I have a hard time getting up and going. I'm in a lot of pain. He said, well, I can stay home and just sit around in a lot of pain, or I can go serve a mission in a lot of pain. Either way, I can do something. And so we knew a number of them who were just like, well, pain or not. I mean, it's not like I'm staying home. I'm not going to be in pain. So they actually did go ahead and serve, and had a huge, huge impact for good. Just their life experiences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really
As
amazing.
one said to me,
It
because I
is
said,
when
you
a
go
lot
out
of
in these
people, I think,
villages.
yes,
I said, you're out in these villages and you just sit on the ground. I was trying to imagine that, because sometimes your knees, like, how do you even get up? Like it's hard when you get old. You can't figure out how to get up, And they said, yeah, I was good in flight. It was the takeoffs and the landings that were hard, getting up, getting back down. But yeah,
that's right. I remember reading that.
yeah.
Yeah. amazing. But I goes to show you that a lot of people, and I don't know whether it's because we're so ingrained in our comforts or whether it's maybe our societies that tell us you're too old to do anything. The people, especially in work that you're kind of doing, um, realize that, like life does not end at 60, life end at 65 or 70. I still have a lot that can be done. So it's an interesting thing to kind of wonder, is it our societies that tell us our elderly are kind of like, kind of like our past their sell by date? Or is it just, that we have that in our own minds that once we reach a certain age, well, I can't do anything? But that's a real inspiration to people who maybe have that mindset and should be, probably spread a bit more, become a bit more prevalent in our kind of first world societies. That just because you reach a certain age doesn't mean to say that, you can't contribute in whatever kind of way.
And I say it to Parker because he's used to doing a lot. And, and we're older now. So as he hit 80, I mean, he was building a pole barn and fixing our dock and putting up fencing. And then things started to go wrong with his body. And he really was thinking, what is my value? And I said, your value is what you know. And I said, some friends of ours had called and said, we want to redo our whole fireplace. We're not sure how. We don't want you to do it. We want you to come and tell us how to do it. Because that is the value, that you often just help people understand how to do it. And it's interesting, older, middle-aged men in their 40s, late 30s and 40s, will come up to me like, I don't know, that my husband, because I don't act like I think he's great, they'll come up to me and say, your husband is so great. I learned so much from him. And that man hardly ever talks. So when he does open his mouth, people do listen. And so here are all these men, accomplished men, they run businesses and stuff, coming up to tell me, how wise my husband is. Kind of like, you should treat him with more respect, which I don't. I mean, I tried. I mean, I'm not saying I'm disrespectful, but I have been known to give him a hard time.
Yeah. No, I understand. I guess, you arrived there and your first sign or first realization that this was going to be a task, and it's I guess it's a testament to the dedication and the discipline and the faith, I guess, that you and Parker had, that when you left that community, it was completely transformed from the state and the mindset that you entered it. Because when you and Parker arrived in, you were immediately kind of greeted by a very kind of unfriendly church congregation. Certainly the Spanish speaking people, even the Spanish church leader was disappointed because he says, can you not speak Spanish? We don't need more people who can speak English. We really need more people who can speak Spanish. So, I mean, that must have been a massive kind of setback. And I know that you kind of had a hard time of it, but one thing that kind of gave you a bit of faith was reading back a letter that you had wrote to yourself to a senior kind of missionary couple, and taking a lot of comfort and faith, even from your own words.
It's true. When we first went there, our thought was, what we can't do any good. I mean, if we can't speak the language. And so we were actually serving with two congregations. One was Spanish speaking, one was English speaking. And the English speaking was the most unfriendly congregation. People wouldn't even talk to each other. It was a very quiet church, very lovely. And I really had gotten discouraged. And I don't usually get discouraged. When people say, oh, you can't do that, my reaction is usually, well, just watch me. But at this point, I was thinking, maybe you did make a mistake, God. Maybe we really shouldn't be here. And then I did remember this letter I had written to someone who I knew they were thinking, we're not doing any good. But our small congregation that they had come to serve with had been going through a lot of trials, and people were really struggling. And just to have them there, just to have them upbeat and showing up to help whenever help was needed, because that's all they were there for, right? Was just they weren't working, they were just there and available to help, really gave us the strength we needed to get through those times as a congregation. And as I read that, I realized that we were probably doing the same thing and didn't really realize it. And so then we really buckled down and, did our best. And we never got very good at Spanish. But the thing about people, Hispanics who move into the US, and probably the same thing happens in the UK, is they learn enough English to get along. And we learned enough Spanish to get along. And after a while, we could understand their Spanish. I just couldn't get through it in my head fast enough to turn my English into Spanish. So, but they could understand my English. So that's how we talked to each other. They spoke in Spanish, we spoke in English, and it worked.
Yeah.
We did keep trying. It's not like we gave up. But one's actually told me in Spanish how bad my Spanish was. He's like, "Oh, su español es muy mal." I was like, "Okay, I get it." But in fact, once between missions, we went down to Guatemala, and I went over to ask someone a question in Spanish, and she just looked at me and said, "I don't speak English." And I thought, "Oh, well, that was supposed to be Spanish," but the really bad Spanish accent. Yeah.
I guess it's amazing, when you, I don't know, I guess what am I trying to say here is that sometimes, help doesn't have to come from external sources. Sometimes the best advice is the advice that you dish out to other people. Sometimes you go, yeah, I'm kind of dishing out this advice to someone else, but yet I should learn to take my own advice.
Yes. Right. Like, just, you're here for a purpose, and you probably don't see it. Like I said, we saw that missionary couple that they looked discouraged to us, and they had no idea what a huge positive impact they were having on us. And I think that same thing happened on our missions. In fact, I write that story about walking through town once. We wear these name badges, right? There were these black name badges. And I was thinking, we're going for another medical appointment for Parker. Like, what does this have to do with missionary work? That's kind of my attitude all the time. And, what does this have to do with missionary work? And then I saw this guy sitting, he looked like he was in his 20s, just sitting on his bench, on a bus bench, watching us, just really focused on us. And I felt the Spirit say to me, "You have no idea how much good you do just when you're walking around." And I had a sense of that young man had pulled back from his church, and when he saw us, he was rethinking, where's my life? Where do I want it to be right now? That's kind of what the Spirit was sharing with me. Like, you're going to do good even at the medical appointment.
I guess it's thing, because I know that was kind of one of my things, because we mentioned at the start of this, and you've just touched on it there, that you and Parker had expected to go in and just talk about the Bible and preach the gospel, and most of your missionary work involve going to people's houses who may or who may not have been friendly. You kind of joke on it, like, "Oh, close the door, don't let them in," that type of thing. When you're coming up to the door, you're expecting that. Asking children if they wanted to be baptized and not knowing how that would kind of go down with their parents. One-to-one meetings with the church president. So a lot of this stuff that seemed to be, as you mentioned there, what's this got to do with missionary work? What's this got to do with missionary work? And what you actually began to realize is that what you were there to do was strengthen the church, by bringing people back to the church in whatever kind of ways that may have helped them. And it wasn't necessarily through preaching the gospel, but it may have just been giving them aid or helping them with their day-to-day lives, to let them know that, there was a lot of good within the church still, for whatever reason they lacked. And obviously supporting young elders, as we mentioned, are activating members who slipped away. But it wasn't necessarily preaching gospel. It was helping people what you thought was completely unrelated to missionary work. But when you found kind of, I think you mentioned you were, okay, now I'm getting a sense of a foundation here of what it is that we're helping to do. By helping people in their own lives, we're helping to bring them back into the church.
It's true. We did see that. And, you mentioned the young children. The husband and the wife belonged to two different churches, and they couldn't decide on one. So what they decided was none. And so then their children wanted to learn about God, and they asked us to come teach them. But part of what we teach is that in the Christian religion, baptism is a part of that, right? And so then we asked, this is how we always do it. We don't say you have to get baptized. What we say is this is what the Bible says, and you decide. You find out from God what you should do.
Yeah.
And the parents had said that whatever the children decided, they could do. But as soon as they decided they wanted to be baptized into one particular church, the Father's church, then all of a sudden they didn't want us to come anymore. Like they said it, but they didn't mean it. And then they said the children weren't old enough to decide. And the children were older. They were, 12. So those were the kinds of situations we ran into. And what they really wanted us to do was just come teach the children the Bible. They wanted them to learn about God, and so that's what we just started doing. Because the mother called and said, aren't you going to come again? The daughter called and said, aren't you going to come again? And I said, well, I didn't think your mother wanted us to. And I could hear her mother in the background saying, yeah, you can come. But we couldn't talk about baptism. We just talked about God, which was fine. That worked for us. It was like we were their church. And that's what I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be someone's church. I don't want to be the person they look to. What I want to be is like those arrows pointing to God. Like they look at me and what they see is me saying, go to God, go to God. And yes, we did think that we would get to sit down and talk about God and in a particular order, talk about baptism. And what actually we ended up doing was a lot of service work, as you said. We spent a lot of time with people. We eventually ended up going to the jail or the prison to teach because we were working with inner city. And a lot of people in the inner city, they're very good people, and they have some relatives who are not. And just about everyone we were teaching would say, could you go visit our relative who happens to be in jail or prison right now? And we showed up there so often, one of the prison people came up to us and said, would you like to teach a class? We said, yeah, that'd be nice, because then we could see them all at once, So yeah, we started teaching the men in prison. That was interesting. Yeah.
It's just amazing how, I know that they say God works in mysterious ways, but it never fails to cease me, and I'm sure it never fails to cease you, the ways in which, how service works, where people rediscover their faith and rediscover, the light, God, the creator again, through even the most kind of seemingly mundane tasks, whereas you're complaining, like, how on earth is this going to lead anywhere? And it's just through these series of events that it just turns out to be this incredible kind of path and journey, which you could never have predicted. As we just mentioned there, just from sitting with people and not even be allowed to even talk about baptism, but just kind of sitting there, people who you think were very unfriendly, people who were, just showing up, or maybe people who weren't even taking your phone calls, and just out of the blue or somehow through a series of events or coincidences, they either come looking you, or you find out that, God, we were doing some good after all, and now they're very enthusiastic to return to the church and return to God. It really is amazing. It never ceases to fill me.
It's true, and I think we're just part of it. That's how I feel. Yeah, I think Paul says something like one plants the seed and one nourishes it and one harvests it. We're just part of a chain of people who were showing up when we were needed. And Sister Mary, she's the one, Maria, the one I talk about a lot, who is in her 80s. I mean, she's still alive. I can look her up and find her phone number. Like, how can you still be alive? But and both her wrists were broken, and so we're like, we're going to have to help her at least get to the grocery store, and she couldn't drive. And so we started, I swear we spent 3 or 4 days a week doing things with Sister Mary for
some of the people
we were there. And what we learned from this, and I think this is an important thing, we were visiting a lot of older people whose health, like hers, was not good. And as a result, they weren't coming to church. And one lady, Sister Ruth, she just couldn't hear. She's like, what's the point? I cannot understand what they're saying. And I'm just sitting there. And people, people move in and out of areas like you're thinking about moving right now, right? So they move in and out of areas, and the younger people, some of them didn't even know these people or didn't know why they weren't coming. They just thought, oh, well, they stopped coming. And maybe they're not interested in church anymore. And what we were finding is a lot of the elderly really want to be involved in some way in church, but don't have the financial means, the physical health to be there. And so when we would bring Sister Mary to church, people were like, oh my gosh, is she still alive? Like, I remember when she was my Sunday school teacher, like, that, like they loved her, but they had just kind of forgotten about her. And people should look around their local congregation if they're involved in a church and say, who are the elderly who are not coming out? I'm going to like plug another book right now. What does she call it? Her last name is Buchanan, but it's something about serving in a worn out body. How can I serve in my worn out body? and people in nursing homes and stuff get a lot out of that book. There's a sense of, I still am here. I still have some kind of value. And it'd be good to, as leaders of churches, to look around.
It was amazing. And yeah, we got to know a lot of the people in the book. It was almost like the reader is there with these people. Sister Beatrice in her death quilt. You had to attend a welcome home party for her grandson. At the same time, her brother was getting buried, and you find out that then he was related to her, Sister Carla. She mentioned breaking her arms. And you wrote this very long piece about Sister Carla, who was so
and she I mean, everything, like she would say things. She was one of those people, like you had to allow an extra 15 minutes because as you said goodbye and walked out the door, she'd be like, oh, by the way. And it would be like, oh, by the way, I can't use my oven anymore. Why can't you? Well, because every time I turn it on, flames shoot out. Well, you know what? We should look at that. That's kind of the thing we would be doing. Like, I don't want to take a bath because it's so cold in my bathroom. Why is it cold in your bathroom? Well, there's a hole in the floor. Oh, well, we would probably want to take care of that too. Those are the kinds of things she'd say to us. And at one point, she was in her 80s. She couldn't keep up her backyard. So we actually got a church project where all the men came over and they helped us just take all the weeds and stuff down in her backyard. We happened to have a truck by this point. The El Camino was gone, and we had actually gotten a decent new truck. And we piled all those weeds on it. And then we drove over to Sister Beatrice's house. And Sister Beatrice had goats. And as we pulled up with all these weeds and stuff, she started crying. She said, I have but to think it. I have but to think it. And God provides. That she had just been thinking that morning, what am I going to feed the goats? And here we came with this huge, truckload of weeds and things. Sister Carla was the opposite. She didn't, she was just this paranoid, kind of schizophrenic, crazy lady, actually. And so we said, what would you like to have in your backyard now? And she said, oh, tomatoes. So we planted tomatoes, and she could see them from her back porch step. And she watched them all growing, and they're green, and finally they're ripe. And we're like, do you want to go out and pick these tomatoes that she'd been watching us care for? I said, no, I don't really like tomatoes. That's the kind of person she was. It's just like, oh, well, we're sure glad we did that for you. Now we'll go share them with somebody else. But yeah, she was just funny. Yeah.
Yeah. Even having to take her to the doctors, and she was so slow. You had to slow down to keep up with her and trying to get her medication. She wasn't keeping up with. There was so much. It was exhausting, the amount of effort and time that you put into this lady. And at one point, both of you are questioning, should we be spending so much time with one person when that time could be devoted to a number of other people in need?
It's true. And when we prayed, this was the answer we got. I love her. She is one of my beloved. When she was younger and had her health, she served me faithfully and well. And now I want you to take care of her as well as you can, spend as much time with her as she needs. And to me, that just speaks to how much God loves us. And And I know people who think, well, I'm not doing enough. I visit my neighbor. I do it. It's enough. It's enough.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, and it's excuse me. Sometimes we're looking for like a grand act or a please swarm around me to my congregation. Most of the time, it's the smallest, simplest acts, those smallest, simplest acts of kindness that make the most. So we're looking to make a big splash in the world, and it's not always like that. It's not generally, it's not like that. It's normally the small, tiny things that you do for people that count the most. Like Brother
I think this
Raphael,
is a good
who,
point. Yeah. And there was that lady in Alaska I felt like God kept saying, call her. And
yeah,
it's embarrassing. I've been in sales. And if you call someone a couple times and they don't call you back, they're not interested. They're not going to call you and say no. And so I don't want to be that person that someone else on the other end of the line is like, oh, great, this one will bother me again, right? And that's what it felt like with this one. We had visited her. She let us visit her one time. And, it was a small house. She had a couple of children who were disabled. And she actually had, it was long ago enough that she had an answering machine next to her. And every time her phone would ring, she would just let the message go to the answering machine. She was sitting right there, but she didn't pick up. And so I knew, and she never let us visit again. And at least once a week for about 6 or 8 weeks, I felt like I needed to call her. And I'd say, clearly she's not interested. Like she doesn't want us to visit. She has no interest in hearing from us. It's embarrassing for me to call her. I thought, oh, God wants to humiliate me. So I would call her anyway. So I would call her and pretty much I'd say the same thing. We'd love to visit. Or if not, if you ever need anything, call us and here's our number. And so that went on for literally a couple of months. And one day she called me and I thought, oh, and she said, I'm in the hospital. I went in for what was supposed to be an in and out surgery, a day surgery. And I thought I would be home. And my kids are coming home from school, but something went wrong and I can't get home. And her husband up in Alaska is called working on the slope. He worked on the slope. So he would have had to fly back. But right there, there was a volcano going off or something. They couldn't fly. So she said, he can't get home. I just need someone to go over and make sure my kids are okay. And when that happened, that's when I realized what God had really been doing. I don't think if I had just called once and left one message, like 2 months before, that she would have known who to call. It was that call week after week, 8 calls. And probably she had saved one of them on her, answering machine. But you used to be able to call your answering machine and get the messages. And that's how she got my number to call me. So when she needed the help, well, she knew who to call because I kept saying the same thing. If you need help, call us. Here's our number. So yeah, it was just one of those things where God really set it up and I could see it after the fact. And I really did not want to call her. Every time I would have an argument. Like clearly it's no. But I'm so glad it worked out. It did work out.
yeah, that was a really powerful, moving story. But also there was other characters, I guess you meant, like once again, Brother Raphael, who needed help for moving his wheelchair. And while you happened to be there, you smelled gas from the house. If you and Parker had not have been there, they probably would have been ended up dead the next day.
Right. It's interesting because this is when part of us, Parker and I, learning to work together. Let me just say, my learning to work with Parker. So we had both prayed about what we should do. Now, remember, we had a prayer about the mission and we got the same answer on the same day, right? Sell the house. So we would get up and we would look over our list of people in the congregation and pray, who should we go see? And I came up with 3 names. Well, he came up with a couple of different names and I thought he was wrong. That's really how I looked at it. Oh, he's wrong. And, but, so we went to see all 5. And I thought that really the reason he wanted to know, so his brother Raphael was actually married to Sister Beatrice with the goats, right? So we go there and I thought he just wants to see those goats. But we go there and that's when Brother Raphael is keeps talking about, he needs to fix his wheelchair. Something has to be done. He's worried about a fire. And what if there's a fire? How can he safely get out? And because his wheelchair would tip over backwards and we were supposed to put something on it. And then we could smell gas. Well, they were old enough. They could not smell it. And we went in and realized that one of their burners at a gas stove was on just a little bit. And if they had gone in and tried to start that there would be all this gas. I think there might have been an explosion. And so, we got the windows open and got it cleared out. But what I got from that is God was going to give me part of the answer, and he was going to give Parker part of the answer. We were going to have to work together because we would both have only part of the answer. In the book I'm working on, I have a good story that goes with this. I don't know if I'm going to share it with you now, like for upcoming events. My husband and I think very differently. And he has more of an engineer's brain, how I use this, and an artist's brain. And I am very logical. I'm Mr. Spock. And I have a degree in math for a reason, because I'm good at it. And I tend to set aside emotion. And so one day I was taking one of those online intelligence tests, right? And I scored pretty high. But there were 5 parts to it. And I scored high in 3 parts. And the other 2 not so well. Things like patterns. My husband's very good with patterns. So I said, hey, Parker, you should come take this test too. And he did. And we scored almost the same. But he scored really high in the 2 others, plus there was one where we had some overlap. I said, what would be cool? We should take this test together. And if we disagree on an answer, if it's one of the things I'm good at, we'll go with my answer. And if it's one of the things you're good at, we'll go with your answer. And I'm telling you, we were off the charts genius when we took that test together. We were so high. And what I got from that is the reason we work so well together is because we think so differently. I stopped thinking, I don't want to listen to what he says because I don't think like that, right? I began where I would seek him out. Well, what do you think? Because he thinks differently than I do, and he's going to see it differently than I do. And instead of seeing it as kind of irritating that he would come up with all these reasons why it might be an issue or what else I should look at, it became something I wanted. And part of that learning then was continued on this mission where we would pray, who should we visit today? And often get different answers. And then we would just visit them all. And it was amazing how often that worked, because once we're on missions for like years, right? So this happened one time where we were praying, who should we go see? And we pull up to this house and we hadn't called. We just were going to show up. And there was a car backing out of the driveway. So we thought, okay, I guess we can't visit. But the husband rolls down his window and he said, oh, are you here to see my wife? And we were like, yeah. And he said, she's waiting for you. And I thought, well, how can she be waiting for us? Like, waiting call. And as we went to the door, she said, I can't believe you're here already. She said, I just got off the phone with church headquarters complaining about something. And we were like, well, that's not why we're here. We didn't know you made that call. But we were able to help her with her issue. And she's like, they didn't call you? I was like, no, we were just praying. And God told us to come see you today. So I guess God knew that you had a problem. And he sent us. And so those were the kinds of experiences that we had where we just managed to show up where people needed us by just saying, who do you want us to visit today? And right now, I'm actually looking forward to doing that again. I do it. It's part of what I wrote about in the first book, giving my to-do list to God. I'd say, what do you want me to do today? And often it's to call someone or to visit them. And we're both have some big projects we're finishing up. And I said, as soon as these projects are done, what I'd really like us to do is, as a couple, act like when we were on missions, or we'll just say, who do you want us to take care of today? I'm looking forward to that. I don't actually have to be on a mission to do it. We're retired. We can just do it.
Yeah. It's a beautiful way of being, a beautiful way of serving, of just saying, like, who or what do you need me to serve? And sometimes the answer comes unexpectedly. Sometimes you kind of go, this person, surely it couldn't be this person. And it generally is that person, even if you think, well, there's absolutely nothing that I could do to help this person. There's nothing that I have in common with that person. But once you kind of get to know them a little bit, then I feel, for me anyway, that you do get a sense, or their outer appearance or outer exterior does soften, and you get a little more into their heart. And then you get kind of that answer, oh, right, okay, this is why. And again, it doesn't have to be anything major. It could be a kind of word. It can be a favor. I guess the ways in which you can be called to serve are as common, I guess, as grains of sand on the beach, something like that.
Yes.
It's just amazing. Sister Grace there, 94, very, very ill. She was ready to die, but she wanted to dictate her life story, I think I remember. And you helped her with that. And then obviously Jose Romero, you spent a long time looking for him.
Oh, Jose Romero. Yeah. So well, let's go back to Sister Grace first, because she did want to die and she kept asking, Parker to bless her. And he would tell her that she still had work to do. And she was in a nursing home in the hospital part in bed on painkillers. She was hardly ever awake. And I thought, what in the world could she have left to do? But then she was given a blessing and told that she wanted to write her family history for her children. And so she did that. It took a couple of weeks. And when she was finished and approved it, she died 2 days later. She was ready to go. And she knew she was going home, that she'd finished all the work that she needed to here on earth. Now, Jose Romero, he was much younger. And the younger missionary said, "You got to read this guy. He's crazy." I said, "You want us to meet a crazy guy?" And he said, "Oh yeah, he's just fun, like he does all this stuff. He does woodworking and stuff." And we kept going to his house, and he was never there. He'd bang on the door, he wouldn't be there. And at the same time, we were teaching another couple, marriage counseling classes. That's what they seemed to need. So that's what we were working with them with. And I can remember, I can't even tell you, like 5, 6, 7 times we would go to Jose Romero. And then finally we ran into some of the younger missionaries, and they said they had seen him. And we said, "Really? How did it go?" And they said, "Well, his whole family has fallen apart. His wife took the kids and left him and went back to Mexico. He's here by himself. He can't get him to come back." And we thought, my gosh, he really needs stuff. Like, we have these marriage counseling courses we teach, right? Like something like that for him. But no. And so we just could never find him. And then one day we were teaching this other family, and they had, oh my gosh, these marriage counseling courses. And his wife was upset because turns out what he did was he would go into these drunken rages. And I thought, way over our pay grade. I don't have to deal with that. But he had stopped drinking as we went through these courses. And she had told us that his one brother was a particular problem because he drank, and whenever he came over, her husband drank. So we're sitting there and we see this guy walk past the window, and she's like, "Oh, it's his brother." And I was like, "Is this the brother who makes him drink?" And she said, "No, this is a good brother." And he knocked on the door, and he came in, and he's just introducing himself. And he said, "Oh, I'm a member of the church." We said, You are? Really? So what's your name? And he said, "Oh, Jose Romero." Like, oh, so we finally got to meet Jose Romero. He actually showed up at that house. And then we started working with Jose. And he's like, making promises to God. Because he wasn't going to church. He said, "If you will bring my family back to me, we will go to church." And in Mexico, they were going to church. His wife and their children were going to church. And he promised God that when they came back, he would send them back, they would go to church. And they did come back. And he did not go to church. And so sometimes people would say to us, "I'm going to go to church," and they would never show up. And, why do we want them there? Because they feel that spirit, because they will hear some words that will make a change in their life, because they see people who are committing to living a better way, and it helps them commit to living a better way. It's the same way you might take a yoga class or an art class. It's not like you can't do it on your own, but it's good if you can get there. And so I would think, why do people say they'll come and then they don't? And I thought, well, Jose Romero even told God he would go to church and then didn't. So yeah, but he was a good guy. We enjoyed him. He was a little different.
Yeah. Around about this time, which is a very important and traumatic period of time, is that you got the news that Parker's daughter Bonnie and son-in-law KJ, isn't it KJ or is it AJ?
KJ.
KJ. They were involved in a car accident. Now Bonnie was pretty much fine, but KJ was thrown from the car. suffered a fractured skull. They had to remove a piece of skull to keep the swelling down in the brain, and they didn't know whether he was going to make it or not. And pretty much around that same period of time, Parker's mother also passed as well. And I guess most people's reaction would be to drop what they're doing and to race up to be by the bedside of, both the daughter, son-in-law, and the mother. But instead, you felt that you were best staying where you were and just prayed and fasted. And a lot of people may consider that to be selfish or unfeeling. And I'd love to know what your thoughts around this was. I know you go into it in the book, you kind of deliberated it and you pulled it a little back from the church and had to think about it, but ultimately you felt that you were best placed and best positioned to serve there.
It's interesting because Parker is a guy, and if he can't think of something to do, he doesn't know why he needs to be there. The thought that just being there would be enough. And I left that decision up to him. Do you want to leave? And he said, I don't know what I would do if I was there. And so we did call the local church, and she had siblings nearby, and they all reached out, were helping, babysit kids and provide meals and take care of them. And we stayed where we were, and someone else near us was in a car accident, a terrible car accident, where Parker was able to go and give them blessings, and we were able to provide some meals and things. And so, here's what I've learned from this, that if someone is praying about something and they get an answer, it isn't my job to judge their answer. Sometimes it looks crazy, and I think, why would you do this? And I know people look at us sometimes and think, why are you doing that? And Paul actually says that in the Bible. He said, when I follow the Spirit, sometimes it looks like foolishness to people, like I'm doing something foolish. When he went to Rome, someone said to him, if you go to Rome, you're going to be killed. And he said, well, whether or not, I know what I'm supposed to do is go to Rome, and I'm going. That's how we felt. That was our answer, and we did what was our answer. It might have been a different answer for someone else. But I had a friend who felt like she should move to back to the West, and there wasn't a lot of jobs there. She and her husband were in West Virginia. And I was like, there's no jobs there. Like, I don't know what you think you're going to find. But they went. And what actually happened is they found her mother, who was schizophrenic and was falling apart. And they came back and brought her mother with her. Like, really, this is how bad it was where they were, where the jobs were. You do not think of Appalachia in the U.S. as being the high job place. It's not. And they left Appalachia to go someplace worse. And they came back. But the whole point of their going was, I think, to end up with her mother and give her the help she needed. They didn't realize that at the time. And people who were telling her not to go, and she kept saying, but I keep praying, God keeps telling me to go, were thinking she's foolish. And so I do try to pay attention to the Spirit and try not to judge other people who get answers that are different than mine, unless it's Parker, then I like to judge him. But then it turns out that was what we were supposed to do. And KJ did recover.
Yeah. We were just kind of talking about this before the interview kind of went live about whether, because I had just got pretty bad news before the interview went live, but pretty much in the same way that you explained about Parker, as I felt, well, what good would it do me not holding the interview? It's not like I can do anything, so probably the best thing that I can do is let the interview go ahead. And I kind of said to you, well, you're the best kind of person who can help in this situation because of your background, because of the congregation that you can, that you are in touch with, that could, offer their prayers and assistance. So sometimes it's not a selfish way, but kind of looking at the bigger picture. We are where we're kind of meant to be, and we're in that best place to serve and provide help. Now, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the zip code maths and stuff that you did, but I'll kind of leave that after, because there was a part that you had mentioned that I thought was really interesting, you'd kind of touched on this just before we were talking about this. There was a lady or young lady called Krista who you mentioned wanted to be spiritually fed. She wanted to, know about the Bible and scripture and stuff like that. But her mother had enough of the church. She had a lot of bad experiences. She called the people in the church hypocrites that didn't believe. And you had a kind of interesting perspective on that by saying, well, by that reckoning, no one then should try anything. Coaches and teachers should never try to help their pupils or help their charges, under them, because they know that they're not going to get it right first time. They know that they're going to fail. But you mentioned that it's not about the succeeding. We're not meant to, believe 100%, or we're not meant to come into this 100% with our faith. It's about the trying. It's about, okay, I'll try it once, I'll try it twice, I'll try it 3 times. It's also about meeting other people with a shared vision, people with shared goals. And I find that very interesting.
I did feel that way. I felt like, well, then I guess that makes me a yoga hypocrite, because I say I should be able to do a headstand. I still can't do a headstand. I've been doing yoga for years. And, or football hypocrite, because I should have been able to make that field goal, but I didn't make that field goal. But people judge people who go to church on a much higher level. Well, you should be able to forgive. Well, I'm trying, right? Or you should never judge people. Well, I'm trying. At least I'm trying, right? And so, but I don't always make it all the time. So if you're not going to call me a hypocrite when I don't, football hypocrite when I don't make the field goal, or a yoga hypocrite, then please don't call me a hypocrite at church, because I'm trying. And that was the point I was making. And people believe in organized school. They believe in organized sports. They believe in organized art classes, but they don't believe in any organized training today. Mm-hmm. Or spiritual training. No organized spiritual training. But that's what religion is. It's an organized spiritual training. And yes, sometimes you get a bad coach or a bad pastor, but it gives me a place to go every week where I meet people who are committed to learning how to do this, and where I'm reminded this is what it takes to be a spiritual person. You need to spend time with God every day. Part of what will come out of it is this more love and less judgment. Am I perfect at it? No, not even close, but I'm trying. And that weekly meeting reminds me and puts me, and the other thing it gives me, I meet people who need help. I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't know who needs help. I'm just sitting at home going to work. I don't know. And God does. You could ask him. But also at church, we hear a lot because people call the church. And so I find a lot of people to help. They don't even come to church. They're not even members, but they call the churches. People know to call the churches. As much as other people complain about the churches, when people need help, they call the churches. Can you help? Can you help me with my bill? Can you help me, right? Can you help me with rides to the doctors? Can you help me with meals? They call the churches. That's who they call. They do not call the local football team. They do not call the yoga class. They call the churches, because we're the people who show up. We're looking for people to help. So yeah,
that's so true. And it was also, I have to say, it was also a kind of lesson for me, because we do get into the habit of criticizing the church for not being perfect, for people kind of being there and professing their faith and not truly believing. But it's so utterly true. We only have to step back and look at our own lives and realize we're not perfect, where we are not fully committed to something that we believe in, where we give advice out to people, but yet we don't follow our own advice. So it was also a kind of a good lesson and a good something to contemplate for myself, to realize that there may be people in all walks of life, not just the church. The church is far from perfect, but it's certainly in the public crosshair. But you're absolutely right. The benefits and the help that it gives to people through debt, relief, through transport to a location, through bereavement counsel, things like that. It's something that people turn to. You're right; they don't turn to anything else. It's straight to the church when they need that help. So it's a remembrance for me, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I do feel it's an important point to make. Oh,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I do love church. Not everybody does. I get that, but I do. So, and that's why, as I said, thank you for putting it
yeah.
in some good words. Yeah.
No, absolutely fine. There's another part about forgiveness or atonement, but that is also talked about when you get to Alaska. So I'll kind of bring that up again there. The other point that you kind of realize that although that you have this faith, and I've talked about this many times too, our faith, just as we were talking about, is not perfect. We are what we think is our way of serving is generally not the way in which we're led to serve. And a lot of the time, we don't get feedback. We don't get, it seems like our time is wasted. It seems like, what we're doing, no one's listening, as you mentioned, no one's bothering. It was like Jonah in the whale, as you mentioned. And then it just kind of takes one person, in this case, the mission president, to say, look, stop trying to be in a certain way, just be yourself. Just stop trying to serve in a certain way, thinking that this is what's needed. All you need to do is simply be yourself. And that just means opening up your heart and shining and being this person that you are. And once you decided to do that, you began to see the sea change in the parishioners and the people that you interacted with, simply by being yourself, by allowing yourself to being yourself and not being what you thought that the people needed.
It's true. I did feel like, oh my gosh, I just can't figure out what to do. And then I had that thought where I felt like God said, stop trying to do it right. Just do it well. Just relax and love, and whatever, it'll be okay. Whatever you decide to do is going to be okay. And that can be hard for me. It's hard for a logical person who's like thinks emotions are like something you should avoid, to really do that. And so that was probably one of the things that came about for me through this mission, was my ability to more open my heart and just be there for people. I remember I was at this couple who had waited years, finally had a child. They had 2 children, twins. And the one twin died, and the other twin was still in the hospital because they'd come early. And we had a graveside service, and only the husband could go. And I can remember going to that service, seeing that tiny, tiny little coffin, and thinking, I wanted to just kneel and to sort of honor him. But we were all standing there. And so I didn't. And I felt the Spirit say to me, bridle your passions, but not these good feelings, this love. Like, don't bridle that. We learned a lot. We learned a lot on these missions. Yeah. And it changed our heart. Well, Parker has a good heart.
Yeah,
I mean, people who meet Parker just immediately respond. He's the kind that dogs and little kids are just hanging on. I remember we went to see a lady the other day, and he went in first. I was doing something in the car, and she just said, "Oh," she just calls him Big Heart. She just took one look at him and was like, "Oh, Big Heart." People could just feel it. I'm not that. I walk in and they're like, "Don't play poker with that woman," like that, right? But it comes across more and more. He's starting to rub off on me.
The other great talking point that I wanted to bring up as well, which was really interesting. You were talking about learning this idea of being whole. What does whole faith mean? What does it mean to be a whole person? And you generally find that it is those people who have extreme trials in their life that represent this idea of wholeness, that despite what's going on in their life, like those people as you mentioned, they just exude this serenity. They constantly smile. They never kind of fall into this doom and gloom. and whatever's going on in their life, they're able to handle it. They are able to still maintain their faith. They're still able to be the person that they are without falling into anger or resentment or sorrow. And it was a really great thing to talk about and thing to actually learn, or sorry, read. And you kind of mentioned that it's not that we're meant to not have challenges and we're not meant to have traumas or afflictions, but it is that the knowing that despite these challenges that we're going to be supported through them. That's the difference.
I think it is. It is that focus. It's not our circumstances. It's our focus. And so that's what I saw from like that couple. I refer to them as a serene couple. You know, when we say they're smiling, and they were calm, but they weren't that sort of giddy, happy, like over the top. It was just this sort of sense of calm happiness that they exuded. And I did put that together with whole. And the reason I was studying whole is it was a promise that was given to me when I first married Parker, and it felt like, I mean, God told me to marry him, and I was thinking, I just don't think marriage would be good right now. But the promise that was given was all will be made whole as a result of this marriage. And my children were struggling with things. Why am I bringing this up? And so I began to research what the word whole meant in the Bible. And Christ used that word, not with the 9 lepers that were healed, but with the one that came back and thanked him. And the Greek underlying that word refers to emotional and spiritual healing, not just physical healing. And so that's what I was looking at. Who did I think were whole people? And these were whole. Sister Grace, who felt like, you know, was struggling through all that time and wanted to die, and then finally wrote her story so she could die. I saw her as whole. And that's what I was looking for. Who are these people I think of as whole, and why are they? And that's what I'm aiming for in my life. And it cannot be easy. It can be hard, Zenith. Mostly I deal with most problems pretty well now. And mostly before I leave the house, like my whole New Year's resolution last year was to love people as Christ and God do. And when I would leave the house, I would think about that. Whether I'm in the grocery store or wherever I am, to just love the people. But Parker was going through a bad time, and we thought he might die this year. It was really bad. It was like I was married to Benjamin Button. He was getting worse and worse. It was like, oh my gosh, now I had to get him dressed, and I'm going to have to help him with his toileting, and he is not looking good. And let's just say I did not handle it well to start with. I was really, you know, and God would try to put that peace, that peace he gives you, it's all going to be fine. And I thought, I don't want your peace. I want Parker. Like, you just back off. I'd rather have Parker than your peace, okay? But don't back off too far. And it took me a long time to finally he would say, Margaret, he's not yours. He's mine. And you're together, but you're in different paths. And whatever I have in store for him, and I have something in store for you. It's not easy to accept that, Zenith. It's not easy, as you said, to say, here's where I think I'm headed, and God has me going somewhere else. And so that's probably been the hardest thing I've had to face recently, because we're at that age. One of us is going to die first. We know it. Unless I'm driving and kill us in a car accident. But Parker always thinks I'm going to kill us in a car accident when I'm driving. But yeah, we're going to have to confront that. And I hope I'm at that point able to confront it the way the people I saw who were whole did. Like, this is just something I'm going to accept.
Yeah, it's a very poignant way of looking at things. It comes to us all, and how do we prepare for that? And I suppose it's easy saying, well, if you really are a person of faith, then you should have no fear over it. But we're still very much human while we're here, and still prone to human emotions. And when we are used to waking up with someone every day and being so much a part of that person's life. When that person is no longer there, then I would imagine it has this gulf, I guess, in your life. But I guess if we can just try to have that understanding, as you rightly say there so poignantly, is that although you're together with someone, your paths are your paths, and God may have something different in store from your idea of a kind of happy ending, that it maybe makes the passing a little easier. But you actually left that church, as we were talking about in the beginning, the trials and tribulations, from going from a very unfriendly community, an unfriendly parish, through once again these acts of service that didn't seem to be anything to do with preaching the gospel, but you started visiting people in their own homes, gathering as much information about them as you could, attending the women's enrichment meeting with no one even talking to each other. And then eventually, through the information that you'd gathered on people and just talking to one parishioner or other, you were able to say, well, oh, such and such lives down there, they need some company, or such and such. This was also helped by, you got the zip codes for all people, so you were able to see who lived in the immediate vicinity of people, and then who came day minding your grandkids. This other lady is bored sitting in all day. She could be company with you, and it made such a community. People began to see that they had a lot in common with other people who they were complete strangers to, but also then they lived such in close vicinity where they didn't even know that. And that was probably one of the biggest things that you took away from that community.
We did do that, and it was exactly that. We started introducing people to each other, and especially people who live near each other, and just in sort of a natural form of conversation. And it was actually in a Hispanic church. We were in like meeting to learn English or whatever we were doing, and I could say, oh, this woman lives near you and she has these same issues. And they started making plans to get together, and then did get together, and they built the really close relationships. And then in the English speaking church, we would say, will you come to church? No, those people are unfriendly. And we'd say, well, why don't you go and be the friendly ones? No, I don't want to. Those people are unfriendly. I was like, okay. So when people would come, and they would literally go into the church, and now our church didn't have a foyer, so we actually talk in the chapel. And someone would come in and sit like way up front on the right-hand side. So then the next person would come in and sit as far away from they could in the back on the left-hand side. And they would sort of fill in like this, like trying not to touch each other or be near each other. And I can remember we would walk up with someone, we'd say, oh, come here, I want you to introduce you. And we'd say, oh, so-and-so, this is, Mr. So-and-so, and he also drives truck or likes to work on cars or whatever. And they would look at me like, why are you doing this? And I was hoping they'd say, oh, hi, good to meet you. It was almost like I had to take their hand. See, this is what you say right now. Oh, good to meet you. Like that, right? And we had gone to a women's meeting. Now, usually when the women's meet in the middle of the week to work on some project, and what we were doing was crocheting little caps for new, children who were born premature. And so I walk in, there's no lights on in the church except way down the hall I see one light in one room. And I walk in and there's like 5 sisters there, women, and they're not talking to each other. They're just crocheting away. So I said, oh, so how do I start? And the one woman said to me, oh, I'm not in charge. And so I kind of looked around, and so I thought, well, am I supposed to like tap everybody? Are you the one in charge? And which is actually what I ended up doing. Are you the one in charge? So someone who was in charge said, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's how to do it. Well, over time, with our introducing them, and also they asked a new lady to be in charge of these activities, and she was like all over it. It was like party time for her. She had the whole church filled with decorations. She had all these activities going on and music playing, and people started coming out and actually talking to each other. In fact, like on Sundays, we would have the women's meeting, and we'd be sitting, and everyone everyone was so quiet, they would just stand up and start it. But after a few weeks of this lady and us working, they were talking so that the person who wanted to start the meeting had to say, I'm ready to start now. We'd be quiet, ready to start now. So we actually started talking to each other. And I remember we had actually, this is so funny because we'd actually gone to the mission president and said, these people are so unfriendly. And he said, yeah, I know. Why do you think I put you there? And I was like, well, I don't know what you think I'm going to do because I'm like an introvert, right? But somehow I channeled my sister Kara, who is not, and was doing all this stuff. And so that after about a year, it was amazing how friendly they were. And a young couple had been renting there, and they wanted to buy a house, and they got up and said in church, we were so glad we were able to find a house in this church boundaries, because everyone is so friendly and loving. It was like a complete flip from when we first went there. And I'm not going to take any or all of the credit, because certainly other people were doing a lot of things to help make that difference. And what I get from that is it only takes a few people, and to go around and start finding out about people and introducing them to each other and letting them know what they have in common. And, people will just take off with that. People are basically good and scared, and a little nervous about, meeting new people. So if you can help make that happen, yeah.
It's like a snowball, you roll it down a hill and it gathers momentum. It only takes one or two people, doesn't it, to get the ball rolling, to get that snowball, and then it takes on a momentum, a life of its own.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. Because we're gone, but I think they're still friendly.
But yeah, so kind of moving on, you had by this stage said, okay, I'm done with this. I don't want to do any more, but they transferred to Alaska, which I think your sister was hoping that you would be, transferred there, or would eventually serve. And by this stage, you were I don't really want to do this anymore. I've done it. This was your idea, Parker. So there was a kind of a disagreement about that, and eventually there was agreement that if this was going to be done, if you were going to continue on volunteering or being a missionary or serving, then he would have to field all the phone calls, make all the appointments, and in that way, then you had this agreement that you would continue on to Alaska. Unfortunately, the arguments didn't quite stop there, because you wanted to see the beautiful sights and he kind of wanted to race on.
Right. Sounds like a man and a woman, doesn't it? So yes, it's interesting because what we had always said we would serve missions, and it was our idea was we would always serve 2 missions. But then I said, we never really prayed about that. It wasn't like God said we should serve 2 missions. It was just our plan, and we've served one, and it was difficult. It was, spiritual growth isn't easy. It can be painful. And I was like, I'm done. I really am done. I just want to go live a life and read books and whatever. And he said, but we always said we'd serve 2. Now, here's the thing about Parker. He really did act like I was the one in charge. And I was making all the calls and setting up appointments and planning the lessons. And because we did do some teaching, or we'd have a message. We're going to go visit, and we'll at least share this small message and have a prayer. And I mean, there was one woman we visited. He didn't like her because she was kind of whiny and crabby, and he would just reach up and flip off his hearing aids. It's like he wasn't even there. I'm like, it was my mission. What are you doing? And so I said, okay, if we're going to go on a second one, then you're going to be in charge. I'm the one. I mean, I don't have hearing aids, so I can't flip them off. But you know what I'm saying? And so, and he said yes, he would. And I thought, my sister had said, why don't you see if you can come to Alaska, because we need some older couples up here, senior couples. And I thought, I like to let God decide where we're going to go. I don't want to ask for a place. But we did talk to the mission president there, and he said, why don't you pray and see if you should come to Alaska? And I thought, well, that's, darn, he's a good mission president, because that's exactly what we need to do, right? And so we did pray and get a sense that we should at least ask if we could go to Alaska. Now, even if you put in and say, here's where I'd like to go, that isn't necessarily where you're going to get sent. But we did get sent to Alaska. And what I was worried about was being eaten by a grizzly bear and being where it's dark. And the day we got the calling, there was like these headline newses that an older couple who were very, experienced Alaskans were eaten by a grizzly bear. And I thought, why? Okay. And I mean, when people think of Alaska, it's huge. It's huge. It's like almost half the size of the United States. And there's less than 1 million people who live up there. And most of them live in Anchorage. And so when you're out in other places, there might be 50 people and they call it a town. And lots of scary animals there. And it's dark and cold. So it turned out we loved Alaska. We loved Alaska. They actually have a show, something about the gold digger miners in Alaska, and there's some guy, Parker, in Haines, Alaska. His grandfather had a place. We actually lived in Haines for a while and visited with his grandfather a lot. He was a very good Christian man. So here's what had happened. Just before we went to Alaska, I had been talking with God about this idea of forgiveness and repentance. And in the New Testament, there's this story about this guy who owed $1 million, and that debt is forgiven him. Then he goes to someone who owes him 10 cents, and he's going to throw him in debtor's prison because he doesn't pay him the 10 cents. And the idea is, God's forgiven us so much, we should forgive other people. And we were working with a woman at the time who had been severely abused as a young girl, and would go out and try to hide in the chicken pen so that the person who was abusing her sexually couldn't find her. And she and most of her siblings were on drugs, which is not unusual when you come from that background. Some had committed suicide. And as I'm trying to teach her this story, I was like, I can't even do it, because it seems to me like she's the one who's owed $1 million and she owes 10 cents. What happened to her, right? And so we were showing her this little movie we show called The Mediator, and you can find it on YouTube, The Mediator. And in it, there's someone who owes a debt, this young man. And then this guy who looks like Christ comes, and it's about justice and mercy. Like, justice demands to be paid, and mercy is, willing to say, it's okay. And what this movie shows, excuse me, is that when Christ he basically pays the debt. And when we think of paying the debt, I think we think of punishment. But as I watched the movie, I saw the guy who represented justice, who was demanding to be paid because he was owed a debt by this kid, right? And the guy who represents Christ comes up and says, I'll pay the debt. He can't, but I will. And when I watched that, I started thinking, well, who is owed the debt? And I realized she was owed the debt. I'm owed the debt. People have had bad things. We've had bad things happen to us. And what Christ says is, I can make it up to you. That other person can't. Whether or not they ask for your forgiveness, whether or not they ever say they're sorry, if you will turn to me and will forgive them the debt, because if you don't forgive them, then you're trying to get paid twice, right? Then I will somehow make it up to you. I will change your life. I will give you things in your life to make it better, to heal you from this suffering that you're going through. So now we're on this trip, and I sort of have this idea in my head, and we're going with Parker, and it's thousands of miles from up to Alaska. I mean, you have to go up through Canada and over and back down. There's no road to Alaska. And it's beautiful, and it was in the fall, beautiful time of year. And we were given a week to get there. And Parker's doing his 15-hour days. We leave in the dark. We stop in the dark. And I was like, you promised, how many times will we get to make this trip, that we could stop and see places? And he wouldn't do it. And so now we're mad at each other because he won't stop. And I'm especially mad because he won't stop. And I'm saying to God, well, I might make this trip again, but I won't be doing it with Parker, I'll tell you. Like that, right? And he said, are you really trying to figure this out? And I said, yes, I would like to see how the atonement works here. Which is really terrible. I know anybody listening to it who understands the atonement, is thinking, what kind of selfish, well, that's who I am. So, and God still works with me and accomplishes good stuff. So imagine what he's doing with you. So that's what I'm thinking. And the thought came, I want you to calm down and then say to Parker, I really thought this trip was going to be different. I want you to stop so I can get out and just see the scenery here, which is amazing. Um, and he did. And he pulled over and I got out of the car and just walked back in and was sitting. And then I was a little nervous because I was hearing some rustling and I thought it might be a grizzly bear because they had put a big sign up like, don't camp here because the bear's out and it's in the fall and they're going to eat you, basically, right? And so I was a little nervous, and then I saw Parker come and just sort of walk by. He didn't say anything to me, but I knew what he was doing. He was just looking to make sure I was all right. And went back and after all, I went in and sat down and I said to him quietly, I had hoped the whole trip would be like this. And he said, it still could be. And then it was. We took our time the rest of the trip and we stopped and saw things. And but here was a thought I had. It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, God could have said, we just reminded me, look, he's a good man. You're fortunate to be with him and you're going to get there early. So, suck it up. Or he could have, had the car break down. So like on our first mission where we're stuck, couldn't go anywhere. And we would have had to enjoy the scenery. Or he could have happened what happened, which is that, Parker gave me what I wanted just out of love. So it really was a sense of healing and that Christ was watching and he knew. And that's such a tiny, tiny little thing, but it did make a difference. And I just know, sometimes I tell this story and I pull out in the US like a dollar bill. I don't have a dollar bill to pull out.
Completely.
But on the front, there's a person. There's like somebody, who knows who it is. Ben Franklin. It depends on what bill it is, right? And then on the back, there's like this building. And I said, when I look at a dollar, I think of that as like the atonement, the price that was paid for me. And the front, the one person represents me. This is me, where God takes all my debts and forgives me and extends mercy. And on the back is like this building full of people who have hurt me. And God said, I can make up to you what they've done. I won't give you back the same life, but I can give you a better life. And I am Jesus. And so I think it's like the atonement. He holds it out and says, do you accept this? Do you accept this? Because in the scriptures, it says, if you don't forgive, you're not forgiven. It's almost as if, how can I can't take just the front of the dollar. It's all or nothing, but it's all a gift. It's all a gift. We're healed of the grief and pain other people have caused us and the guilt and shame we feel for the hurt we've caused other people. And that's what Christ gives us. So, yeah.
Yeah. It was a really introspective way of looking at things. It was a real kind of, as I said before, like just some of your other pieces really caused me to think about the way in which forgiveness and atonement comes into my life. So once again, it was really important that for me. So really, obviously, when you kind of got there, it was a different way of living from Flagstaff, not only below temperatures, but how that you had to eat, had to heat, had to cook. All of your kind of preconceptions and your beliefs that you were ready to unpack had to be kind of like, well, okay, I need to put them aside. I can't be a vegetarian up here. I can't not kill anything. You had to immerse yourself in that life, especially when you moved on to an even more remoter sort of smaller village. You had to participate in cutting up the seals. You had to smack a fish over the head to kill it and learn how to gut it and stuff like that. Just completely immerse yourself in that way of life in order to survive.
So we were living in Kotzebue, which is north of the Arctic Circle. I mean, it's north. And we lived up there about 9 months, and it's a native village, and mostly it's the Inuit people are there. And they have, some people like us, white people showing up. And they were very accepting of us, very welcoming. It was wonderful. And we had heard all this stuff, about the elders and also subsistence living. It hardly seems fair. If you're down in the lower 48, you're like, well, how come they get to kill 50 caribou and everybody else can only kill 2? But then we got out there and realized they not only do that, they do share. Like the fish, they were starting to ice fish. It had frozen enough, and the fish had showed up. And some older ladies, they called them elders, were out there on the ice, and they pulled out like 50 fish, brought them into town, shared them with everybody, and then the rest of the town went out there and started fishing. And Parker was trying. He went out, and no matter what he did, someone said he should have done it different. Oh, you're not down deep enough. Oh, you're down too deep. Like, oh, you couldn't catch a fish. So as he's leaving, he's coming back to town. This little old lady says to him, "Oh, no fish." He said, "No, I couldn't catch a fish." He goes, "Here, take one of mine." And that's how they were. They really did. If the fishing was good or the hunting was good, you got as much as you could, and then brought it back to town and shared it. That's what it was about. And so it was, and the elders, how they treated the elders was amazing to me. They really did listen to what they had to say. And they had a community center, and the elders would, they hung out in the community center, but once a week they had a meeting. And I don't know what they talked about because I didn't go to the meetings. But we were working with their history, their family histories, and they had a lot of information. And the church was the Friends Church, or the Quaker Church, and the Quaker Church person actually called us, the priest or pastor, and asked us to put all their records in a database for them, which we did. And then someone else called us and said they had a bunch of records that had been collected in the 60s, and they were talking to elders who, were born in the late 1800s, and they had written their whole family history down. And we transcribed all those and put them in, and then we started making books for people. Like, I was like one of these old Southern ladies, like, "Who's your daddy?" Like that, right? So, "Who's your daddy?" And then I could print out a book for them with all their relatives. And we went in, and one day we were walking, they were having their, who was going to be elected as the mayor or someone. And one of the candidates, we walked by her, and she said, "You two don't know how much good you've done." And I said, "How is that?" She said, "Those books you've been going out have really stopped a lot of fighting." And I was like, "Well, how did that happen?" And she said, "Well, because now they realize they're cousins." And I said, "Well, didn't they already know they were cousins?" She said, "Well, they kind of knew they were related, but they didn't realize how closely they were related till they saw your books." And it truly changed. I mean, the town, they stopped fighting about things because, hey, that's my cousin. And then I thought, well, we know we've made mistakes. And so what we'd really like to have us, like maybe go out to the villages. And the town was really good about being able to get federal. They knew how to write a proposal where they could get some federal funds to pay for things that they were doing up there. And so they said, the mayor said, she was then elected mayor. She said, I think that's a good idea. That's exactly what we should do, is take all this out to all the little outlying villages and have the elders go over it and make sure that it's correct. And then she said, "But first I'm going to go meet with them and see if they think it's a good idea." I mean, she was the mayor. She could have made that happen. But she wasn't going to do anything until she went to where the elders were meeting and have them agree that it was a good idea, and which I think she did. We eventually left. But then, like once we were walking into town really fast, this is how they thought. I mean, this is what they were raised with. We're walking into town, and Parker's hood is down so you could see his gray hair. And there's a couple of like 20-year-old guys who were kind of drunk on the corner. And as we came, we were a little nervous, like, oh, what could they do? They might do something. And instead, as Parker went by, they were like, "Oh, gray hair. Gray hair means wisdom." And that's how they were. And we went to a town social, and we're hanging back because in the lower 48, in the town social, the first people through the line are the kids or the parents with little kids, right? Everybody else kind of hangs back until the kids get fed, right? Well, all the kids come running up to us, grabbing our hands, like, we can't eat until you eat. Like, the elders, the people with the gray hair went through first, which is why I have gray hair, because I was like, hey, that works for me here. I can have gray hair. I don't have to diet. I want gray hair. So yeah, just amazing. And I thought, what if people did that down here? We older people know so much. They know what's been tried in the past. They know what's in that shed behind the church where everything gets tossed when you don't need it anymore, right? So go ask them what they think. I can't even imagine it happening that, some mayor in the lower 48 who would go in, or I don't know how it happens in the UK, what you call them, would go to the senior citizen center and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? Like, why not? They know.
Yeah.
They've been there. They've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
just
yes.
amazing to see that culture, to see that way of life and see, wow, this is the way it should be. Communal decisions, respect for the elders. And it's just, we've got, I guess, completely divorced from that down here. So absolutely some kind of life-changing lessons. And we kind of tend to look at, maybe not so much to a large degree, but certainly in some aspects of, well, they're kind of more primitive people. They're not as well educated as us. But really, at the end of the day, those are the cultures, those are the societies that could teach us a lesson, that could teach us a proper and a better way of living. Yeah.
Yes.
And I just wanted to, because you'd mentioned there briefly about the task that you realize you were up there for. Once again, it wasn't about preaching the gospel, but it was about sorting out these things, and it became, a monumental task. And I wanted to just highlight how, much time and effort that was put into that. I mean, you had to get records, history books, ancestors, and the whole adoption scheme was massive. Such and such was adopted to X, such and such was adopted to Y, having to untangle all these family trees, assigning proper records from different things and finding out who was related to who. And you done that for like an entire month. Getting boxes of
Oh no, that
famine
was like
and food
8 months,
records.
and all day, a month, because we ended up with thousands of records. When we first started, we only had a few hundred. It took about a month, but then this person sent us a box of records, and I knew that they had two tribal organizations. One is the one who tracks who could be part of the tribe, and the other was looking at the tribal businesses, because they did get a settlement from the government, and as part of the settlement, they were still living a very communal lifestyle. They decided what they would do with the settlement as a group, and everyone put in what they wanted to see happen with that money. Where down in the lower 48, they were no longer living a communal lifestyle. They just gave everybody part of the money, and they bought trucks and cars, and then the money was gone, right? And so right up in Alaska, they invested in businesses, and they still have money coming in. Well, at some point, those records had been given to one of those two groups. We don't know which one, but then they were never seen again. And what we had was copies, and they even had notes on it saying recorded. So at some point they had been recorded, but the people didn't have access to it. So now we're recording them all. And it was interesting because they do have an adoption culture, which what I learned from that is that children know the difference between a choice and between necessity. So when parents died, back in the early 1900s because of these flu, like half of the town would die from that flu that went through in the 1918s, and someone would go in and take the living children and adopt them and take care of them. They were grateful. But others, they were just like, oh, I have 3 girls and you have 3 boys. I can have one of my daughters and I'll take one of your sons. That didn't go over really well. The kids were hurt by that. And I could look through, because I was looking basically through time as I'm entering all of these names. And what they would do is take a dotted line and draw it from one family to another. And that dotted line meant that child had been adopted from this family into this other family. And so a lot of them really were hurt, and you could see it. Then that line, I almost could predict what was going to happen to that adopted child. They would end up having a lot of children out of wedlock. They would not have very strong relationships, and they would often end up alcoholic. And so I began to rethink the adoption culture, when it works and when it doesn't. Yeah, I remember one woman saying to us, they gave me away like I was a puppy dog, just very bitter and angry about how she was adopted from one family to another. And yet, a lot of them had a lot of healing. So, yeah, it was an interesting experience. Things I learned from doing it, and just the impact it had on the town when we were able to put these books together showing their relatives and how they were related. It really was funny because I could start to recognize different families. Like, oh, this family has long faces, and this family has these little round with a dimple here. And I'd be like, I bet you're, Papa Joe's family or something. I don't know why that was a gift, but it was a gift. As the mayor said, that was a gift to the town that we did that.
Yeah,
and it had nothing
quite
to
a
do
part
with
of your,
it.
It took up quite a part of your time in Alaska. Obviously, there were other parts, serving different individual members as you did in Flagstaff, and there were a few other kind of things. But eventually, you were transferred yet again. You were transferred to something. I think it's Skyway, which seemed to be a million miles away. Yeah, away from Alaska, where you were kind of living instead of this life of subsistence, where you were kind of living this life of plenty, completely a different way of life. And you mentioned there that you and Parker had actually given up bickering on the first mission, and by the time that you got to there, you'd kind of given up on arguments in this one. So you'd become a lot closer and a lot more tolerant of each other. And I guess that one thing you learned there was it was all about the importance of family and stuff before you eventually left Skyway.
It was. We worked with families up there. We did similar things where we were helping people track their family history. And I remember one family that actually joined the church. It was a mom and her daughter and their kids and the daughter's ex-husband all joined the church. And people said, wow, she is so different. And it's amazing the change God can create in people's hearts. She just became the daughter especially became a very different person. Someone said, I didn't even like her before, but now she's likable. Saw a miracle in the mother. She was on disability, and she couldn't even walk at that point. And when we met her, before she joined it, when we met her, she was walking up to, the front of the church to talk about the miracle that had happened in her life. And it was good for us to see these kinds of changes in people's lives, because you think, well, what difference does it really make? But people would say it did make a difference and share with us how it did. That was good.
Yeah.
I'm glad we went.
Yeah, it seemed to be a nice kind of reward at the end of your missionary work, from all of the work and the hardship and the unfriendliness that you first encountered in Flagstaff, to the frugal life of substance. Even though there was great beauty in Alaska, the real hardships physically that you encountered there. So it seemed to be a kind of nice end, a nice kind of reward. And then on the way back, you actually did get to take some sightseeing trips, probably because you'd kind of sorted out your differences there. So it kind of, very dovetailed nicely into this kind of nice ending. Then you kind of end on the book where you are kind of starting out where you kind of started off. You'd sold a house, and now you're kind of back to square one where you are looking for a house. And again, it ended up in a small miracle where we were talking about kind of earlier. Although you did have this business, you still only had enough money to pay cash, and you needed all these factors to come in. It kind of needed to have a path away from the road. You wanted natural gas pumped into it, and it didn't seem for a long time that you were going to get anything that, kind of ticked the boxes, until eventually, once again, you go and see this house, and it seems to tick all the boxes for like a third of what you were looking to pay, and you get that voice to say, you're not going to get a better offer than this here. So you kind of got rewarded for all the sacrifices that you'd kind of made.
It did, and we love that house. It's interesting because not everybody knows this, but there's places in the United States, not many of them, where if you have natural gas on your property, someone else can go drill the well, but you get free natural gas. So it was like, whoa, we want that, so, because we wanted to make sure we were going to be warm and have hot water, and so yes, and we only had X dollars, and everything seemed to be about twice that much. And then we ended up with this place that was about a third of that. And it was kind of a miracle the way we found it. And we loved living there. We lived there about 10 years before we moved to Florida. And it felt like we were back where we started. We had lived in a small mountain town with a small community. And then we sold that house and we ended up in a small mountain town in a small community. But our hearts had changed. And I could just feel the difference in our marriage. We were so glad that we spent those years serving as missionaries. It made a huge difference.
Yeah. You ended up where you started to in your first book, where Parker then was the leader of the local congregation, and you ended up as president of the Relief Society, helping the infirm and sick again. So you've come full circle in your journey again.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I was talking with God about, I think I put this at the end where I'm saying, why, well, the question was, why did Sister Carla come to church? That's what God said to me. I'm like, people, they don't want to come. And he said, well, why did Sister Carla come to church? And I thought, well, why did she come to church? I don't know why. And I started thinking about it. I thought, well, she came to church because she knew I loved her. And that's really what it really, I mean, everybody knows that. You can say that. Oh, what makes the difference? Love made the difference. Love loved people. It made the difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely. And obviously, yeah, just at the very end of the book, you have a little epilogue where you discuss what eventually happened to, the people you'd kind of met along the way. So it was kind of nice as well for the reader to find out some of these characters which you bring to life in the book. Where did their journey continue after you kind of left them, to bring some sort of closure, I guess, which was really nice.
Yeah, because people are like, well, what happened with Jose Romero? And I was like, well, what happened with Jose Romero is kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, because here's the book, right? And so what happened with Jose Romero? Well, guess what? He didn't go to church. He didn't change, and his family kind of falls apart. So just, these are real people. It's nice if you write fiction, you can wrap it all up nice and neat, and they're like perfect, right? But that isn't what happened. So Sister Beatrice and Raphael, they're still busy. Oh my gosh, and she just gave us food all the time, right? And Sister Charity, right? The woman baptized just we left. We were afraid she'd get offended, and she did get offended, but she kept going to church anyway. And then Ronnie, we had been teaching him. We didn't talk about it here, and he ends up back in prison, and his girlfriend leaves him and moves him with a married guy. I mean, they just kept being themselves. Sister Carla, I said, Bill, she is so paranoid and so suspicious that I don't think she'll be nice about us after we leave. And then when we went back to visit, they were like, do you know what she says about you? And I was like you stole money from her and you did all these terrible things. And I was like, yeah, I kind of knew that's where it was going to go because of who she was. Like, people just keep being who they are, right? Yeah. Funny. We had a good time.
Yeah, really, really nice. So, what's the plans for the future? Because I know that the first time that I've spoken to you, you were actually working on a third book, and from reading the second book, I know that that's still a work in progress.
It is so close to finished. I have it all written. and I was trying to figure out what order to lay it out in. And I wanted to make sure, so I wanted to have like the key parts. And so that's all done. It's all organized. I know what the key parts are. Just yesterday, I finished going through and making sure that I had everything. And the first third of it has been critiqued, and I'm sending it out to beta readers right now. And then I was hoping to have it finished, by the end of September, and then maybe by the end of the year, but now Christmas is coming. So we'll see how close I get, because it's not going to take too much more work. And I hope next year, I am going to actually try to get a traditional publisher for that particular book. I bet the other books is self-published, because we actually owned a publishing business, so that made sense at one point. Yeah. And it has 3,000 copies, so it did okay for self-published. But I'm going to see if this one I can get a publisher. I'm going to give it like 6 to 9 months, and if I don't, then I'll go ahead and just let people know it's out there. Maybe.
Okay, well, I will look forward to that.
Yeah, Parker and I, the match made in heaven. What happened with Parker is I was a single mom, and I still had 8 kids. Most were in college or finishing high school. And God said to me one day, "You're going to meet the man you're going to marry next fall." And I said, "No, thank you." Like, why would I want that? Because I have 2 teenage sons still at home, and I can't even see how that would work out. And it's interesting, because I was telling my aunt about it, and I said, "I know God's trying to give me a gift, and I don't want the gift." And she said, "Well, how do you know you don't want the gift? You haven't even met the gift yet." And so I met Parker, and I thought, oh, well, this is a match made in heaven, right? God said, I'm going to meet someone, I'm going to marry him. This is Parker. And he came from a background with an abusive alcoholic dad. And it was not what you would think of as a match made in heaven, right? Because we've already talked about Parker and I arguing and having to come together over things. And then that promise was given to me that all would be made whole as a result of this marriage. And because I was thinking, why would I even stay in this marriage? Like, it's not like we have kids together or anything, right? But it's been 20 some years now, and it's been a journey. And so what I share is, the standard things we went through that we were able to work out and create a healing marriage to ourselves and for our children. And I actually called them and said, I didn't tell you about this promise, I would say to him, but I have the promise. Has this marriage been healing on any level for you? And they've all said yes, and then shared how.
So, yes, the last thing then that I wanted just to ask is, where then can people find you, Margaret? Where can they, if they want to go to your website and to read more about you? I know that if they want to purchase your books, where can they find you? I know that also you do little readings from your own book on your YouTube channel, which is nice to hear it in your own voice. So just let people know then, where can they find you and where can they find your books?
So inhisfootsteps.com, and the main page, inhisfootsteps.com, has the links to the books, and the first 2 are both audiobooks at this point, and also my social media, including some YouTube videos where I'm reading and sharing some of the stories. And then I'm not going to say I have a blog. I have a newsletter, and once a month I send out this newsletter, and it'll have a short story in it, something we hope is inspirational, uplifting, and sometimes a little funny. And anyone who signed up for that newsletter will be the first to know when this 3rd book is finally out there. So, and you don't have to worry about getting spammed, because I'm lucky I get 1 newsletter a month done. You're not going to get more than that. So, yeah.
Lovely. Really, really enjoyed our time, Margaret. It's so fascinating reading that book. As I said, it was such an easy book to read, but because there was so much character and so much depth to it, it was a really kind of in-depth, review or kind of interview about it. I really wanted to do it justice. And I guess just before you go, I just kind of wanted to ask, throughout that period of your life, from selling up the house to returning back and purchasing the new house, is there maybe one kind of key lesson or kind of key idea or piece of inspiration that you could maybe share, especially for people who are thinking about starting down that path of becoming missionaries or wanting to serve in a greater way?
I say, like I said in the first book, turn it over to God. For us, it really was, what do you want us to do and how? And he answers those questions and will direct our paths, for good. He does do that. So, yeah, and just be willing, trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Margaret, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. It's one of my longer interviews, one of the shortest books I think I've read, but one of the longest interviews. And I think that speaks testament to the type of book that it was, that the characters that you brought to life, the sources of inspiration, and the ponderings that I done from some of your inner reflections about the nature of atonement, about the nature of faith and belief, amongst the other things. What does it mean to have your own preconceived ideas of what way you should operate in the world when you're faced with a community and environment in which you're forced to survive in a way that is not contrary or is contrary to your current beliefs. So I think it's a real testament to that book. And I just want to say thank you so much for that piece of your life and sharing these characters and these people, and for showing that ways to serve doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of grandiose way in which we're kind of at the pulpit or at the head of a ministry attending to our flock. It's generally the small ways in which we can make a difference in people's lives that make the matter to, or mean the most to those people. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Zenith, for having me.
Your absolute pleasure. And no doubt we will see you again for a third time. Let's just hope it's not as long this time once you get that third book done.
Get that book done. That's right. Thanks.